Welcome, everyone, to this week's episode. As always, we're glad to have you with us here at 15 Minutes and a Big Idea. If you notice, we are audio only this week. I've got some work going on in my house, and so getting the camera set up wasn't really an option for me. Maybe going on for a little while as we're audio only, but hope to return the video component here very soon. Very excited about that. And thanks for your patience on that. So if you're listening on the podcast, if you're a longtime podcast listener, number one, thank you very much as always. But number two, you won't feel any disruptions at all. So if you haven't, go like or follow, subscribe to the podcast where you get it. If you've done that, go on YouTube, follow the Mended Collective. You can get those videos at any time. We look forward to continuing to share this content for you. And while we're here, I'll make a quick note to remember the question and response episode that we're going to have at the end of the book of Philippians. We've done this at the end of every book we've done, James, Titus, Galatians, and Ephesians, and it's been one of my favorite things to do. So if you've got a question for us, send it on over to 15bigideapodcast@gmail.com. That's 15bigideapodcast@gmail.com. Some of you may have a personal information, or you can reach out to us on Facebook or Instagram. We want those questions. And if you think one, there's no way you're going to remember by the time we roll around to the end of Philippians here in, 3, 4 months, 6 months or so. So send that on over now. Get that in ahead of time so we can begin to review those, and you can help us out as we go. So today, let's look at Philippians chapter 2, verses 22 to 24. Philippians chapter 2, verses 22 to 24. But you know of his proven character, that he has served me in the furtherance of the gospel like a child serving his father. Therefore, I hope to send him to you immediately, as soon as I see how things go with me. And I trust in the Lord that I myself will also be coming shortly. Today, we continue with this portrait of Timothy. That's who the he is there in verse number 22. This portrait of Timothy as a Christian who's living worthy of the gospel. We've spent the last several months stepping through what it means to conduct ourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel, and Paul is going to turn to give us a couple of concrete descriptions on what it means to think and live in a way that is worthy in this manner. No longer do we have to think about it in abstracts or in characteristics, but we can see how people are doing it. What are the things they do? Specifically, Paul highlights two people, Timothy and Epaphroditus. They're going to display the characteristics we've seen for months in tangible actions that we can put our eyes on, put our hands on, and put into our lives. In our first episode, thinking about Timothy, we learned that Paul had a desire to learn and care for the Philippians. So he sent Timothy to them because Timothy would display genuine care for them. And Paul makes the incredible statement that Timothy is unique in this genuine care because others care about themselves, but Timothy cares about the interests of Christ. In this, we see that putting others first is fundamentally putting Christ first. Even if we are not appreciated, even if people don't respect us, even if people don't like what we do or care for what we do or think it's good enough, when we put others first, we are serving Christ fundamentally. And that sort of care is what allows us to be productive members of the kingdom. It starts with this. We care about serving Christ, and so we start caring about serving other people. Today, we're going to continue to see a basic portrait of what it means to bring value to other Christians at the simplest level. At the simplest level, sometimes we make Christian service very, very difficult, but in Timothy, we see the very simple things everybody has to do if they want to be an asset. And today's big idea, in fact, is going to be that being an asset is simple. To understand how being an asset is simple, we want to look at, number one, Timothy is proven. Number two, Timothy furthered the gospel. And number three, don't check out in trials. Timothy is proven. Timothy furthered the gospel. Don't check out in trials. So proven, furthered, and trials be the words that outline our study today. Diving into our first point, Paul is going to talk about his confidence in Timothy. Timothy has proven character. And for those of us who are young and getting involved in the work of the kingdom, this is the place to begin. The reason that Timothy was entrusted with this task, with the mission of communicating with the Philippians, was because his character was proven. Sometimes as young people, we're excited. We're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and we know everything, and the world can't stop us, and we want to get involved and be a part of the work of God for the glory of God out of excitement from the Word of God. And that's excellent. We need to do that, and that's a wonderful thing. The trouble is We want positions and opportunities that we don't see it at the time, but in retrospect, we realize we're not mature enough or equipped to handle it. This causes frustration because we're gung-ho and we're sure of ourselves and we're sure of our abilities. Well, of course we could do it. If you're a young person that feels this way, I want to encourage you, as I wish I would have known at this point, is to have patience. Have patience in this. And I want to share with you a fact that's very important that I'm just now coming to understand and perhaps still need to understand more. It's that opportunities are about trust, not talent. Let me say that again. Opportunities are about trust, not talent. As a young person, I've griped about the chance to do things, and often my complaints were about the fact that I'm good enough, I'm talented enough, I'm likable enough, I can do all these things. And regardless of the truth or perhaps the not truth, the untruth of my self-perception or self-deception, as it may be, what I had overlooked is that what matters most is trust from the leadership. Good leaders rarely pick the person with the most talent. They rarely do that. They pick the person they can trust. And while talent level can play into that trust, you've got to have a certain level of talent or a certain level of ability to do certain things. If you can't be trusted, you won't be chosen. And so this changes the game a little bit, because instead of griping about how I have the talent, I ask myself, how can I show that I'm trustworthy? And that's the idea here, is that it says proven, and proven takes time. It doesn't happen immediately. Faithfulness and trustworthiness isn't something you do, it's something you are, and that proving takes time. In some sense, it means putting you in situations where you may be shown to be unfaithful, but instead you're proven to be trustworthy. And so you got to have patience and persistence, because we put in the effort, and eventually those opportunities will come. Maybe not in the time frame we like, but they'll come eventually. Next, we come to an important concept that centers or focuses on what it means to be proven. Proven in what? What is it Timothy has proven himself in? Well, Paul says that Timothy has served him in the furtherance of the gospel. And this is Paul's target. This is Paul's standard for what it means to be useful, for what you need to prove yourself towards. It's moving the gospel forward. Once again, sometimes when we're young, we have a lot of ideas. We've got a lot of suggestions, got a lot of input, but it's not very focused. And sometimes the ideas are good, and sometimes the ideas are really crummy. And for better or worse, the determiner of value is not the ideas you bring and can tell other people to do. It's the ways you personally assist in advancing the gospel. This might be done with a suggestion, it might be done with an idea, but it's more often than not done through giving your time and your effort. And a lot of times, it's easy to stand on the outside and talk about what could change. But when you're the one on the inside and you have to execute, things start to look a good bit different. So if you're a young person, I want to encourage you to ask, how can I serve? Or what can I do? Instead of saying, I've got this idea. You may offer those ideas, and that's good, but realize that the way you move the ball forward and being proven is asking how you can serve. Don't just stand on the outside and talk about what needs to be done, but get in the gears and see to it. In this case, you have a heart towards how you can serve, not how you can criticize. And that's the thing that builds trust amongst leadership. It's not adding your opinion. They've got plenty of those. It's doing things that support the mission of the church as they see fit in your local context. Notice, Paul says that Timothy served him. That's not to say we must become the personal attendant of the leadership, but it does say that we need to support what they're doing. We can't go off as a lone ranger and have our own personal agenda, which is distinct from the rest of the congregation, and expect to gain the trust of the leadership. As young people, we need to have the humility to defer to the wisdom and judgment of those with more experience. And when we do this, we can build our perception of what we actually need to do and be equipped when our time comes, Lord willing. Last, I want to talk about Paul's statement here that might raise some questions, and I think it should, and I think it's good. I don't want to detract from what we've said about Timothy, but we want to take each word seriously. So we want to talk about verses 23 and 24 and show how it circles back to having meaning for us and circles back into this whole context about Timothy. Paul says his intention is to send Timothy to them based on how things go for Paul. And then we get this mystery. Paul says, I trust in the Lord to come to you shortly, which may cause us to ask, where is Paul at? Where is Paul writing this from? What situation is Paul in that he thinks he might be released from the case that he's in? He might get out of the situation that he's dealing with. We already know he's in prison, so he's having to wait on some sort of release. And we don't want to get outside of the obscure to the obvious, but I actually want to shine a light in here because I think it's a helpful thing to think about, finding what's important here. In this case, the usual instinctual reaction when we think about Paul being in prison, and the classical answer is that Paul's in prison at Rome because that's where you find him left in the book of Acts. However, it's often held that Paul was killed at Rome. So this phrase here, that Paul intends to come to them, is kind of strange if his death is pretty imminent. There's a lot of thoughts about what might have happened here. Two of the main ideas are that Paul had 2 imprisonments at Rome, and this would be the first one with a letter like 2 Timothy, where he says, my race is run. That comes during the second imprisonment when things were more dire and it was more obvious. The other option is this, and other letters were written in an imprisonment in Ephesians, or not in Ephesians, but an imprisonment in Ephesus that we don't have any concrete evidence for. Some will argue that there is that there's some allusions to it. But either way, we don't have record of an Ephesian imprisonment. We also don't have record biblically of a second Roman imprisonment, although we have some markers that potentially point that way as well. Whatever direction you go, the Bible doesn't give us all the details, partly because the Bible's intent is theological and not biographical. The Bible's intent is to teach us about who God is, not about who Paul was. The Bible is not about Paul. It's really about God. It's about Jesus. So there's a lot of question marks, and if you want to know what we think, you can ask that in the question response episode that we talked about. Hit our Q&R for later. But what can we take away and learn from this? Because we kind of just shine the light on this thing, and we're like, there appears to be nothing here, or there's nothing we can say with definitiveness. And how can we understand this? Well, I'd like for us to see something important with Paul, is that he didn't just pack it in. All right, he didn't just pack it in. He didn't say, well, I'm in prison, I guess I'll give up. You know, even if this is the same imprisonment in 2 Timothy where he knows he's about to die, at this point he doesn't quit. He realizes with a source of optimism and views the situation realistically. It says, hey, I may get out of here, and so I'm going to make plans. He doesn't just say, well, this is a really bad situation, so I'm just going to give up and quit. He bears the responsibilities of ministry that accompany where he's at and who he is. He doesn't just pack it in and pretend like the sky is falling and the world is over because he's in a bad situation. He still does what he can, and he does not allow his difficulty to become an excuse to abdicate his responsibility. Let's say that again. He does not allow the difficulty of a situation to become an excuse to abdicate his responsibility as much as he's able to take it up. So what do we do with this? So let's put it all together, because this may seem like a disconnected third point from the rest, but I believe the fact that Paul has refused to check out and give up was exactly the kind of model that Timothy saw again and again, not just when Paul was in prison, but throughout their time together, that Timothy looked to and made him an asset. Timothy was proven and worked with Paul, serving him as a father, because Timothy's view of Paul's character and passion and love for the gospel, he saw that it was so natural and infectious in Paul that he couldn't help but catch it. Paul didn't just strong-arm Timothy into being the Christian man and Christian influence that he was, although he does encourage him in 1 and 2 Timothy in those letters. Timothy catches this from who Paul was in his everyday life, and we need to think about this from the side of Christian development, passing the torch or the baton to the next generation. We need young people like Timothy who will put in the time and faithfulness and be proven and will advance the gospel in meaning ways. But first, the rest of us, we need people like Paul who will step up and be an example of what it means to move the gospel forward. The kind of people who are going to bear with responsibilities and take accountability even when it's difficult, even when it's hard, who won't make excuses. We need those people as examples. Those of you who invite the next generation to join you on your way. So let's ask some questions as we think about the kind of people we need to be. Are you proven? Are you faithful? Do you go through and follow through on what you say you will do, or do you drop the ball? Are you all talk, or do you provide value through service and advancing the gospel? Do you contribute to things and find ways to advance the gospel in your context, or do you just offer opinions and criticisms from the outside? Do you look to advance the gospel even in trouble? Or does the slightest disruption cause you to quit? Are you looking for reasons and places where you can advance the gospel, or are you looking for excuses to quit and lay it aside? Is this a passion of yours to add value to others in doing so? Thank you so much for joining us today here at 15 Minutes and a Big Idea. Today's big idea: being an asset is simple.